come in, we can at least start our intro. So welcome everyone. Thank you for logging on this evening. My name is Matt Schumann. I am a programming librarian here at Cary Library in Lexington, Mass. Before we begin, please let me know if you're experiencing any technical issues. I can try to help. If you have questions tonight, please use the Q&A button or the raise hand function. Lastly, this program is made possible by the generous donors to the Cary Library Foundation and in partnership with Ashland Public Library, Tewksbury Public Library, and Somerville Public Library. With us this evening is Zahra Hankir. She is a Lebanese British journalist, editor, and author who writes about the intersection of politics, culture, and society. Her work has appeared in publications including Teen Vogue, Time Magazine, Town and Country, Condé Nast Traveler, The Observer Magazine, and many more. She was awarded a Jack R. Howard Fellowship to attend Columbia Journalism School and holds degrees in politics and Middle Eastern studies. Her first book, Our Women on the Ground, was a bestseller and won the Susan Kaufman Award for the best anthology in feminist studies. And her second book, topic of tonight's talk, Eyeliner, A Cultural History, was a New York Times book review editor's pick and has starred reviews from Publishers Weekly and Library Journal. So now, please welcome Zahra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Matt, for the intro, and thank you to the Cary Library for the invite. And hi to everyone who's joined this talk today. I'm really excited to talk to you about my book, Eyeliner, A Cultural History. It's been out for almost a year now. It's been out for several months. And I'm just going to sort of give you an overview of what the book is about, why I chose to write it, and we can delve a little bit into the various chapters of the book and some of the themes swirling around eyeliner. And I think what really interests people when it comes to this book is that it's kind of a surprising topic, and it's also very niche. I mean, it's a microhistory. It's it's an object that we might see every day and not pay any attention to it or not even think twice about it. It's really a ubiquitous object. But what I try to do in the book is to really explore how and why there is far more to eyeliner than meets the eye. That's the pun that I've been using. It's a bit corny, but it's definitely applicable to the book in the sense that people often think that eyeliner is really about beauty and aesthetics. It's often really associated with a woman, and the notion of a woman beautifying herself. But actually, the way that I view eyeliner today, after having done 2 years of extensive research on it, is that it is a cultural artifact, and it has been used for centuries in ways that go far beyond beauty. It's also been used by people of all genders. Its origins are in ancient Egypt, and it was used by men and women across all social strata, and it was a symbol of rebirth. It was used for spiritual purposes. It was used for aesthetic purposes. Obviously, it was used for medicinal purposes and also practical purposes. It guarded against the glare of the sun. It guarded against the harsh environment of the desert. It could treat bacterial infections that were carried along by the Nile. It would stimulate an immune response in the eye to do that. It was made from natural materials, naturally sourced materials, and it could also be a signifier of a person's class, where they were in society. And sometimes you would have royalty, for example, wearing the highest quality of kohl, also made from natural ingredients, with very sophisticated pots and applicators. And then you had just regular people wearing eyeliner from slightly less sophisticated materials. But really, it was a substance that was worn by all. And in fact, there is an Egyptologist who said you'd be really hard-pressed to find any representation of any ancient Egyptian with eyes that are not lined. Now, to come back to this concept of rebirth and why it was so important, the idea of eyeliner is closely tied to rebirth, because there's this idea that you have to kind of look attractive to attract a spouse or a partner, and then you would then procreate with that partner, and then you would obviously engage in the act of procreation, and then that would lead to this idea of rebirth. And in fact, this was so important in ancient Egyptian society that coal pots were actually buried in tombs so that people could take the pots with them to the afterlife. Now, the idea of protection as well is incredibly important, because there's this feeling that the framing of the eye will protect it not only medicinally and practically, but also against the evil spirits and the evil eye. Now, this this wide array of different reasons why people wear eyeliner and why they wore it historically in ancient Egypt actually continued and continues to the modern day in multiple communities across the global south, particularly in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, the Arab world, however you want to refer to that region. There are multiple communities that use eyeliner in ways that go far beyond simple beautification. So I'll come back to that a little bit later, but before I move on from ancient Egypt, I want to talk a little bit about Queen Nefertiti. She is a main character in my book. What I tried to do with my book was to have main characters in each chapter, really, people who I could speak to, who could really illustrate the importance of eyeliner. Obviously, I did not have the pleasure of interviewing Queen Nefertiti, but she was the main character of that chapter, and I did a lot of research on her. What I say in the chapter is that what Nefertiti tells us, it says a lot more about us than it does about her, because we really don't know too much about Nefertiti. We know that she played a significant part alongside her husband, the pharaoh Akhenaten, in revolutionizing Egyptian society at the time. And our conception of some of her sort of this idea of her being beautiful comes from the bust of Nefertiti, which I'm sure everyone in this call is very familiar with. Now, the bust of Nefertiti is so, I mean, it's so stunning and so memorable that I would say it's really etched into the collective memory in a way that not many other works of art are. And the reason why it's actually so important in the context of eyeliner, in the discussion around eyeliner, is that when this bust was found over 100 years ago, it was discovered in the deserts of Egypt. It was taken out of Egypt by a German archaeologist, some would say stolen from Egypt, and it was taken into Berlin, and then it was displayed in a museum in Berlin exactly 100 years ago, actually. So images of Nefertiti were released, of the bust of Nefertiti were released to the press in 1923, and then the bust itself was displayed in the museum in 1924. Now, the display of the bust caused a huge buzz amongst people for multiple reasons. I think, firstly, there's this very fascinating sort of fixation on the face, on the features of her face, on how angular her face was, how high her cheekbones were, how chiseled her nose was, how her jawline looked, how long her neck was. And the sculpture itself was little damaged as compared to many other sculptures from that era. There was just minor damage to an ear. There was a missing eye and a little damage to the crown, but otherwise it's quite a stunning sculpture. And of course, the eyes are lined very, very distinctly and sharply. And in fact, the lines actually meet at the corner of her eye, creating something of a wing, which I would say was the dawn of the cat eye. Now, at that point in time, there was sort of an interest in the Western world amongst people for when it comes to the idea of like the exotic look and how to achieve that exotic look. So suddenly there was a particular surge in interest in how to achieve Nefertiti's look, because she had that quote unquote exotic look. And one of the ways to achieve that look was to actually line one's eyes with eyeliner. So there was almost an explosion of interest in cosmetics companies and in magazines and advertisements in sort of how to beautify yourself to look like Nefertiti. And one way to do this would be to wear eyeliner. Another way to do this would be to wear a high hat or to style your hair in a particular way. Some people wore collar necklaces, but really it was the eyeliner that was quite distinct. And you would see women all over America, all over Europe, trying to emulate Nefertiti's look. And there were many articles about her in Vogue. And there was actually one incredible image of a woman standing at the top of a pyramid with a kohl pencil, an illustration of a woman at the top of a pyramid with a kohl pencil. So this idea, this fascination with Nefertiti led to or helped propel or spur the popularity of eyeliner in the Western world. And this also came amidst a period of intense fascination with the Middle East, which we would refer to as Orientalism. And it's this idea of sort of the exotic peoples of the Middle East, right? So at the same time, whilst there was this fascination in Nefertiti, there was also a fetishizing of Nefertiti. And there also was a lack of adequate representation in the beauty industry when it came to catering to women of color. So all of these narratives are swirling around this one object, right? And interestingly, it's been 100 years, but we still have these discussions around cultural appropriation or how to look ethnically ambiguous. And this is something I also explore in the final chapter of the book. That's not to say that I necessarily think people wearing eyeliner are engaging in cultural appropriation. I just think that it's part of the several discussions that are swirling around eyeliner as an object. And on that note, I also want to say that there are instances in which eyeliner can be worn insensitively, which could be considered a form of appropriation, but I can come back to that later on. I think largely the idea of wearing eyeliner is a cross-cultural practice that has been shared by multiple communities over the centuries and celebrated. And while people wear eyeliner quite uniquely in these different cultures, there are commonalities and there is a thread. So that's kind of an overview of the first chapter. What I do is I later kind of travel around the world with you, the reader. I try to take you on a tour of the world to kind of show you how eyeliner is worn in very different ways across different communities, whilst having that commonality, that common thread. So I traveled to Chad, and this was actually during the pandemic, so a lot of the travel was quite difficult to do. But I traveled to Chad, and I went to Chad because I wanted to write about the Wadabi community. Now, the Wadabi community are a subset of the Fulani ethnic group. So they're a nomadic community that have a very unique set of cultural practices. And one of those cultural practices is that they hold an annual beauty contest in which the women actually judge the men, which is very refreshing, I think, for most women to hear that the onus is actually on the man to beautify himself. And one of the tools that is used to beautify oneself, if you are a man in that context, is eyeliner, also known as kohl, which is produced from natural materials. That's something I should have mentioned as well for Egypt. The production of kohl is unique as compared to the production of Western eyeliner as we know it today, because it is produced from natural materials. And those natural materials could be minerals, it could be crushed, it could be bone, it could be crushed stone, it could be coffee, it could be nuts, it could be sandalwood, it could be any number of things. The process usually involves the crushing of a substance to create pigment, or the burning of the substance to create soot, which would become the pigment. So this substance is worn amongst the community, the Wadabi community, and they also have very sort of elaborate makeup routines. They wake up at the break of dawn to apply their eyeliner, to apply their facial makeup. They have very elaborate costumes. And the eyeliner to them is so important that they wear it in pots around their neck. And it can also be worn as a talisman. So it is incredibly important in their culture. The idea of beauty to them is very different because they sort of toy with this idea of contrast. So it's the darkness of the stenciling of the eye, and then it's also the darkness of the lips against the whiteness of the teeth. So this playing with contrast is part of what they would consider to be very beautiful. They have their own set of beauty standards that are quite different than Eurocentric beauty norms, and they also believe that beauty is part of their moral code. So they take it very, very seriously. So I spent about a week camping out in the desert, observing this beauty contest, which is really sort of a communal celebration as well. It's where different clans come together. And the purpose of that is to ensure intermarrying between members of the different clans. So that was just one example of how I spoke to people within a community about how important eyeliner is to them and how important its use is. not just in terms of beauty, but also for practical purposes, because eyeliner is also used in these contexts to protect against the glare of the sun, in the way that, for example, an American football player might wear lamp black to protect against the glare of the sun. So my third chapter, and I think quite an important one, is on Iran and the use of eyeliner in Iran. I talk a lot about Mahsa Amini and the policing of women's bodies there, and how important the practice of beautification is as an expression, as just a woman having agency over how she presents, and the face taking on sort of outsized importance in that context, given that her body is otherwise largely covered. So the wearing of eyeliner takes on sort of a different meaning in that context, right? It's sort of more layered than it might be if somebody in the West is wearing eyeliner, right? And it can also be considered a tool for rebellion. I mean, not always, but in some cases, it is considered as such, where a woman still wants to be using makeup and really beautifying herself, even though officially that act of beautification or wearing of makeup was banned in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And of course, with the protests around Mahsa Amini's death, this became sort of, it came to the forefront again, this idea of a woman having agency over her body, and the idea of beautification, and just having that freedom, right, to express oneself. And we saw a lot of interesting expressions of I wouldn't necessarily, I'm very careful to say that it's always rebellion. It's not necessarily always rebellion, but just an expression of one's identity amongst Gen Z in this context, where there are a lot of young girls wearing very, very vivid, distinct eyeliner looks, very graphic wings, you know, doing their hair in particular ways, and then posting on social media and that kind of thing. So I explored eyeliner use in that context, but also in Iran, it's also really important to note that there is sorme. Sorme is, again, naturally produced eyeliner that actually goes back to ancient Persia, and was made from substances like pistachios, hazelnuts, usually nuts would be the main ingredient there. And it was worn similarly in ways that went far beyond beauty. It might indicate a person's religiosity, spirituality. It might indicate a rite of passage, whether a woman was married or not. Carried multiple meanings, and was also definitely a signifier of a woman's beauty. The idea of a woman having darkened eyes, and that's also present in the Arab world. And I think also important in this context, and what makes the discussion around eyeliner quite nuanced in parts of the Muslim world, is that eyeliner is worn by Muslims, both men and women, oftentimes as an expression of their religiosity, because the Prophet Muhammad was said to have worn a form of eyeliner. And this is documented by hadith, which are sayings in Islam. And he essentially wore it for medicinal purposes. But later this became a way to show one's devotion to the Prophet, to Islam, to wear eyeliner. And in fact, there was a fatwa on eyeliner from the United Arab Emirates not too many years ago that said that a woman is allowed to wear eyeliner so long as she is not wearing it to attract the attention of a man. So I found that to be really, really quite interesting too. And important to note that many people do wear sorme or kohl or kajal in such a way, in a way that it shows some devotion to religion or spirituality, right? So it's not simply about looking a certain way. So what makes it quite interesting in Iran is, I say often, there's a fine line, because, you know, sorme and eyeliner can be worn in different ways. You might wear your eyeliner like along your waterline, and it can be quite subtle, but you might also have a wing in the same way that I have a wing as well. So there are different ways of wearing it. It's deeply personal. Not everyone will be wearing it for similar reasons, but it does have the potential to be a tool of self-expression and rebellion. It can be a political tool, but it can also just be a form of celebrating one's personal identity or beliefs. So moving on from Iran, I'm not going to take you to every single country that I went to, because I went to a few. I'll transition on to Jordan. Now, I went to Petra in Jordan to write about the Bedouin community there. So I went to a town there called Sayhoun, and I interviewed, I think, upwards of about 90 Bedouin about their use of kohl, again, a naturally produced substance. And I found it to be such a beautiful sort of celebration of Bedouin identity, whereby young men really, really do wear it, not only to enhance their looks, they do admit to that, but really to celebrate the historical, cultural elements of that identity, one of them being kohl. Now, because the Bedouins spend so much time out in the desert sun, they would often wear the kohl, and they would do that to protect their eyes from the glare of the sun. And sometimes some of the Bedouin that I spoke to would tell me that they don't even own sunglasses or need sunglasses because it's so important to them. One of my favorite jokes actually during my reporting was that a Bedouin man said to me, you know, sometimes people tell him, oh, you look like Jack Sparrow. And then he'll say in response, actually, Jack Sparrow looks like me, which I think is very true and very funny. So that to me was also a really interesting component of the research that I did, because it really spoke to this idea of eyeliner and kohl being an inherent or important part of one's identity, and a celebration of that, and also a form of sort of cultural preservation, right? Because there have been so many changes to the Bedouin community, some of them political, some of them cultural, but they still hold on to the eyeliner and the importance of eyeliner in that community as well. It can be a signifier as to whether or not a man is single or taken. Usually if a man is single, he will wear eyeliner. Of course, women wear it as well in the community. So that was a really interesting component of the research. Now, I also traveled to California to write about the Mexican-American Chola community. And I think that was one of my favorite chapters to research and write and report, because I met so many incredible Mexican-American women, Chicanas and Latinas, and you know, Cholas. They all identify differently, but they had definitely the unifying sort of belief in the importance of eyeliner in their community as being something that celebrates their aesthetic, right? And this is actually quite important politically, because when the Mexican community moved to America, of course, they faced a lot of discrimination, and particular discrimination for how they looked. And as a response to that, there was a rejection of this idea of assimilating to kind of look a particular way. Instead, they said, no, we have our own aesthetic, we have our own look. And they developed this very, very distinct look that came initially from, it's a Pachuca look. Historically, you might want to look into the Zoot Suit riots, because this was a part of it. But essentially, the look was, it started off with really distinct type of clothing, and then emerged from the Pachuca aesthetic to the Chola aesthetic. And the Chola aesthetic also had distinct clothing, but really had very distinct makeup. So very heavily lined eyes, lined lips, big hair, big hoops, nameplate necklaces, plaid, Dickies, a lot of that kind of thing. And again, there's some overlap between the Pachuca aesthetic and the Chola aesthetic, but really it's the Chola aesthetic where the eyeliner really became so distinct. So to report that chapter, I actually sort of entered the lowriding community in Los Angeles to really speak to Cholas and Chicanas about the importance of eyeliner, because they all kind of get decked out when they go to the lowrider shows, and that's another component of sort of pride in their identity and retaining their culture, right? So, you know, many of them told me that to them, this is you know, it's also a political tool, right? It historically had been a political tool. For them, it's an assertion that they are Mexican, right? And that they refuse assimilation. And one of the main characters in that chapter, Winona, who's a lowrider and a Chola and a very outspoken one, for her, because her mother had died by suicide when she was quite young, for her, the Chola aesthetic was a way of sort of carrying on her legacy and honoring her mother, right? And eyeliner was one thing that her mother used to also love. So it was kind of really just moving to discuss that with her and to see how, you know, again, eyeliner has so many stories swirling around it. It isn't just this, you know, this object, right? It's what I tend to say actually is that after having done all the research that I've done, I feel like my eyeliner in the morning is so much heavier because it carries the weight of all of this history. Now, I also traveled to India to write about the Kathakali community in Kerala, which is sort of a form of dance, a traditional dance in India, in which the dancers really, really heavily line their eyes, and the lines themselves can actually speak to what type of character the dancer will be in a play. It's a form of storytelling in which there are eye movements, very distinct eye movements, and hand gestures, and the eye movements each express different types of emotions. And because the eyes are so important, the framing of the eyes is also really important. So it's called Kajal in India. Again, it's also created from natural materials. It also carries a very rich history in which both men and women have worn kajal, and they have worn it for purposes that go beyond beauty, as I said. But really, I embedded myself in the Kathakali community because I really wanted to observe how important it was when it came to this idea of transformation, and there's like an ethereal element to it too. It's like a portal to another place. What they're trying to tell you is the eyes carry such depth, right? There's this notion of the third eye, right? So to observe that up close was also quite fascinating. And I think there are a lot of similarities there between the importance of sort of kajal in India or South Asia, and then also the importance of kohl in the Middle East too. So, you know, some of the, like the ancient texts would mention it. It would be in poetry and literature and film and music. It's sort of ever present. Also, there are names, you know, the Kajal is actually a female name in the same way that in the Arab world, there are also names associated with the word kohl for a woman. So this idea of it being so important is ever present, really, and it is ubiquitous as well. And of course, Kajal is also ever present in Bollywood. And again, the idea of the beauty of an Indian woman is kind of tied to this notion of her having darkened eyes, but it really goes beyond that. Like I said, it really ties into spirituality. I also traveled to Japan to write about the geisha there. And as you can tell, there's sort of a performance element of reporting to my book. I didn't expect there to be that, you know, where there was like a beauty contest in Chad, and then there are dancers in India, and then there are geisha in Japan. And also I wrote about drag queens in New York. But I think important to note this because there's this idea of sort of a stenciled eye being really visible from afar, right? If you're performing on a stage or if you're on camera and your eye is stenciled, your eye is really going to pop, and the attention from the audience is going to be on the person's eyes, right? So this is also very much present amongst the geisha. And again, eyeliner plays an important role. In Japan in particular, what I found to be quite interesting is that red eyeliner or red makeup historically has been associated with protecting against evil spirits. And I thought this to be really interesting because though the different communities and cultures I studied are very distinct across the centuries, so ancient Egypt, and then you've got like the, you know, Arabs, you've got Persians, and you've got Japanese, and you've got Indians, you know, across all these cultures, there is this belief that eyeliner protects you. It protects against the evil eye. It protects against the elements. And I found that to be really interesting as well. I'm going to speak a bit less about the final three chapters, but I will say that I have a chapter on Amy Winehouse, which was really supposed to be a chapter about sort of performance, you know, the use of eyeliner as a tool for transformation amongst performers, performing artists in the West. And of course, as many of you know, you've got some of the greats, Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, Barbra Streisand. You got so many different figures who've worn eyeliner in such distinct ways. Adele, but Amy Winehouse, to my mind, has perhaps the most distinct aesthetic when it comes to how sort of bold her wing was and the reasons why she had that aesthetic. And then I also reported on drag queens in New York City. So I went to Fire Island and I wrote about how important eyeliner is in the drag aesthetic. And I kind of traced the history of makeup in drag history. And then the final chapter was about influencers, and I kind of take us back to Nefertiti, because 100 years later, what I try to say is that she's the original influencer. She's the original beauty influencer because she's influenced so many women over the past 100 years and continues to do so. Now, people often ask me about this idea of cultural appropriation. I'm going to bring it up very briefly. I think important to note, because there are some ways in which eyeliner can be worn insensitively. One of the looks that I mentioned in my book is fox eye, and I elaborate on this in the final chapter. Fox eye is sort of to use eyeliner in a way that gives your eye a very distinct shape. And that shape is actually, a shape that many women in Asia are born with and have been mocked for as they were growing up. And I've quoted many women in the book as saying this. And then suddenly it becomes, fox eye becomes a trend, right? Where some people are wearing eyeliner in a way to actually give them that shape, right? So this is something I think that can be insensitive, but broadly speaking, I do try to tell people that wearing eyeliner is a celebration of culture. And I think we should be aware of the history of eyeliner and where it comes from, where it originates. What I try to do in this book is to really say that eyeliner originates in the Global South, and it is worn in the Global South and amongst communities of color in ways that go far beyond beauty. It is a very layered object, and I think that it's important that we at least know that it carries that meaning. And I'm going to end by just kind of saying personally what drew me to eyeliner, and that was that I grew up in a Lebanese Egyptian household, and my mother used to apply eyeliner when I was very young, and we were living in the UK at the time. My parents had left Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War, and my mom had 6 kids and just a lot of chaos around her. But when she applied her eyeliner in the morning, it was kind of a moment of self-care. It was almost like a ritual for her. It was like everything stood still. And I realized even as a young girl that she was connecting to something far bigger than herself, right? And I learned with time that actually the reason behind that is that kohl plays such an important part in Arab culture. And it was similar also with my grandmother, who was Egyptian. She wore kohl until the day she died. Like, no matter what she was going through, she was always wearing it. And that to me speaks of like this connection that I have, not only with my culture, but with my ancestors, right? With my mom, my grandmas, my great grandmas, and everyone who came before them. So it carries that weight and that meaning. I feel like I'm communicating with my culture when I'm sort of wearing my eyeliner in Brooklyn. So that was 30 minutes nonstop. I know that there was a lot there, but I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any.
Thank you so much, Zahra. That's a fascinating trip. I don't know how you condense it all down to 30 minutes. You're traveling through time and across the entire world. It's absolutely fascinating, the threads that you're able to connect. Just as a reminder, if you have questions, just submit them via the Q&A, or you can do the raise hand function. One question I had is, how long did it take you to do all this traveling and research, and how did you connect with all the people around the world?
Sure. That's actually a good segue into the picture I was going to show, but I actually traveled, one of the places I traveled to was Germany to see Nefertiti's bust, and I saw someone asked if there were going to be visuals. I'm sorry I didn't show visuals as I was speaking, but this is a beautiful picture of Nefertiti's bust. As you can see, her eyes distinctly lined here. And this book is actually filled with illustrations from each culture that I traveled to. Now, in terms of sort of the travel itself, I did it over a period of 2 years. As I said, it was COVID, so it was quite difficult in some cases. I had to make sure, of course, that it was appropriate for me to go, that it was, safe for me to go, that I was very careful with how I traveled. But actually, in many cases, it was really interesting because there were far fewer tourists than usual in these places. And I got to spend a lot of time with the various characters in the book. I ensured that I was spending at least sort of 3 to 4 months of in-depth research for every culture community that I traveled to, knowing that I myself am not from that culture, right? Excluding Jordan, because I'm very familiar with Arab culture. I wanted to be very sensitive to how I approached the questions. I made sure that I did as much reading as I could. I actually had research assistants from within each culture who knew the language. So I wasn't able to do research in some ancient texts, for example. So I would work very closely with them. So that was actually, it's important for me to say that because I really do have to give those research assistants credit, because I feel like it really adds a level of authenticity to the work that I did. And also I tend to say, I always say in my work, I hope that when people go to the Arab world, that they're being very sensitive too in the way that they report on the Arab world. So I try to sort of to practice what I preach in that regard with the countries that I went to. And it was incredibly illuminating for me. I learned so much. I met so many incredible people. I met, like I said, drag queens, monks, performance artists, actors, just all sorts of people. And I'm very grateful to the people who trusted me with their stories, because you would think that it's sort of a superficial subject, but actually when people talk about it, you realize that they have such profound stories to tell, just from this one item of makeup. But yes, it was a lot of travel. Just to sum it up, it was Germany, Jordan, Chad, India, Japan, and California.
We have thank you. We have some more questions that came in. One is a two-part question. Did the creation or use of eyeshadow occur at the same time, or was that later? And what was used as makeup remover in ancient Egypt or Persia?
Yes, very good question. It would have been oils that were used as a way to remove the makeup, or a liquids that would allow for the removal of the makeup. It could have been saliva, but more likely to have been oils. And sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question?
Did the creation or use of eyeshadow occur at the same time, or was that later?
Yes, it is believed that around the same time in ancient Egypt. So similarly from natural substances, and often they would be sort of greens and grays and blacks. Those were usually the colors that were used in eyeshadow and in eyeliner. And I think important also to bring up Cleopatra and the film Cleopatra and Elizabeth Taylor, because she played a huge role in the popularization of eyeliner, another boom in eyeliner in the 1960s. And it's interesting because she wore a lot of blue, right? And people started to think that that was a color that was worn. But in fact, the reason she wore the blue eyeshadow and eyeliner was because of the blue of her eyes, to make her eyes pop more. But actually would have been greens, grays, and blacks. And it was made from galena or malachite.
Very interesting. There's a couple people asking about using kohl, and they're curious, is there a specific type of like application or learned skill to using it, and do you have to maintain it throughout the day, and is it removed in a different way?
Yeah, I love that. So I think really important to note that there's so many different types of eyeliner, right? So there's liquid eyeliner, which I'm wearing here at the top of my eye. There's kohl, which is kind of usually more either a powder or a pencil. And each type of eyeliner, I think, requires different substances for removal. I would say like liquid eyeliner is usually you would need something either a substance with some oil in it, I think. And that again, that goes back to ancient Egypt, and just any substance that's enough to really take the pigment off. But I do want to say that actually some people historically kept eyeliner on for a very long time because it was medicinal. So they would sleep in it. So this idea of sort of removing it every day, or like when you after you put it on, few hours after you put it on, is actually more modern. Usually it would be sort of kept on because it was slept in. Like the Prophet Muhammad was said to have slept in it, and some of the Bedouin that I spoke to in Jordan would keep their eyeliner on because it was so pigmented, it would last for up to a week. Now, in terms of touching it up, again, it also depends on the type of eyeliner you're using. If you're using a powder and it's highly pigmented, you often don't need to touch it up during the day. If you have liquid eyeliner on, if you were Amy Winehouse, you would probably be touching it up pretty much throughout the day to make sure that the lines are sharp. But usually it really just depends on the type of eyeliner you're using and whether or not it smudges. It also depends on your own eyes. Like for some people, eyeliner does not deposit well onto their eyes. It really depends on a number of different factors.
Great. A couple people also asked, how did you might have said this to us, so if you don't mind repeating if you did, but how did you determine like which countries or cultures to visit and research?
Yeah, that was very tough because I could have gone to more countries. I really wanted to represent the various regions of the world and to ensure that the global south was well represented, just because it is, as I said, so central to cultural practices in those parts of the world. And then within each region, I wanted to really zero in on one country, one community, because it's important to note that like different countries, different communities have unique ways to produce and wear eyeliner, even though there is that through line. So I didn't want to be generalizing. I wasn't going to be going to, India and then saying Asia, right? I wanted to be very, very careful with how specific I was in terms of the use. So I just looked at each sort of continent, each region, and I thought, okay, here's a really interesting cultural practice that eyeliner plays a role in that could translate visually quite well, because the book is actually very visual. There's a lot of description in the book, right? So that's why I think I was also drawn to performances and the geisha and that kind of thing, because it really, eyeliner is obviously so visual, right? So there are other places I could have gone. I wish I could have gone to Yemen, because Yemen is said to have one of the purest forms of eyeliner. I could have gone to Nepal. I could have gone to Nigeria. But just so many fascinating different types of uses for eyeliner in those regions. But I do feel like I kind of got sort of a broad sort of look at eyeliner with the locations that I chose, but certainly I could have gone to other places.
Yeah, maybe for a follow-up book.
Maybe.
Somebody was just curious if there's research or evidence of eyeliner being used by ancient Greeks and Romans, and if so, by both men and women.
Yes, absolutely. So it was worn in ancient Greece and it was worn in ancient Rome as well. Less so than in ancient Egypt, but in ancient Greece, they would have used soot, antimony, and burned cork to darken their eyes. So, and it was also similar in Rome. So it similarly also had protective and practical purposes. So it wasn't just about beauty in those locations as well. So they sort of adapted techniques and borrowed techniques from one another and then, melded that to whatever purpose they found to be most important in that specific context. But yes, it was worn, just not as sort of widely as it was in ancient Egypt.
Yeah. Did you say antimony was used?
Yes, antimony. Yes.
I don't know why. Maybe I'm misremembering. I thought that had like there's like a toxic, like you get like arsenic poisoning, kind of similar.
Yes, so yes, that's actually true. And it's like a little bit of a bag of worms here, because I actually mentioned this in an NPR podcast once, and somebody tweeted at me and was like, you shouldn't tell people to. But I mean, so in ancient Egypt, eyeliner was found to have had very, very small traces of lead in it. Very, very small traces of lead. And those traces of lead would stimulate an immune response in the eye that would help treat bacterial infections. Now, there is, under no circumstances would I say anyone could put anything with lead near their eyes, but this is a fact, and it has been studied actually in medical journals.
Wow.
An Algerian man wrote a PhD about it in I think at University of Paris. I mentioned it in the book. So it is true that there were traces of lead. Now, the presence of lead in kohl and Kajal today is actually a huge cause for concern in specific countries, and there is an FDA advisory against the use of kohl and Kajal in America. for this reason, because of the concern that it may contain lead. And also, I didn't mention this, and important to note too, in many of these cultures, eyeliner is applied to babies' eyes,
Wow.
again, as a form of protection. But this is I don't want to say that this happens like all over these cultures. It isn't. It happens in specific pockets, and it's not necessarily widespread, but it is a cause for concern. So that is why there is an FDA advice. There actually were ads around New York City a couple of years ago with like a baby who had eyeliner on, and it was like public service announcement, like, do not wear eyeliner with lead. So I think it is important to note that this was a component of, but it was in tiny traces in ancient Egypt. So I think it's the toxicity today that is associated with kohl would be slightly different than how it was then.
Yeah. Maybe last question can be, while you did all this research and traveling, were you wearing eyeliner as you did it, especially like the beauty contests where the men were being judged and whatnot?
Every single day. There's very rarely a day when I don't wear eyeliner. I wore it during the pandemic every day, even though I was at home alone. I wear it if I go to the bodega. I wear it everywhere. So when I was literally in the desert 10 days, I had really little to do, like little. I didn't have much with me. I had a tiny bag and there wasn't any space, and I was in a tent and it was really hot, but I was still making sure that I was applying my eyeliner, actually. And I was gifted so much eyeliner by members of the community too, which I was testing and trying. So yes,
that's really interesting.
Wear eyeliner, yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your book and all your research with us. The book is a bit, I sent the link, but I'll send it out in the recap email. The link to the book and link to Zahra's website where you can find out more information. And this program is recorded and it'll be on the Cary Library YouTube channel, and you'll get a link in that same email. But thank you again, Zahra. This is awesome.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to have spoken to you today. And please, everyone, feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about eyeliner with complete strangers. So please do. Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good evening.